In this video, you will compare and contrast the roles of indentured servants and slave labor, and you will also examine the impact of the French and Indian War. So open to your BaneTube notes section and begin to take notes. Of course, you may pause the video at any time, rewind it, fast forward, whatever you need to do to get this information. And always remember to jot down any questions that you might have regarding this information. Hopefully you'll remember how to take notes from a BaneTube video with the large notes box and then the smaller questions box. Make sure, write down any questions or let me know if you need clarification on any of this information and I will be sure to help you out. So we need to take a look at what type of colonists lived in the colonies during the 1600s and 1700s. And when Europeans settled in America, they took two types of workers to the colonies with them. They took indentured servants and they took slaves. So make a little graphic organizer in your notes section. Make sure and take these notes down, and we're going to take a look at how these are alike and how they're different. Indentured servants agreed to work. So they were British in Great Britain. Many of them were very poor at this time, and they would say to a ship owner or a land owner or someone who was wealthy, I will agree to work for you if you pay for my trip across the ocean. That's called a contract. When someone says, I will do something for this. So if, let's say, you are a very poor person in Great Britain, you might go to one of these people and say, if you pay for my food to go across the ocean, if you pay for a small house to be built, if you pay for some small land for me to live on, I will work for you. I will grow crops for you. I will fish for you, whatever you need me to do. And that's called an indentured servant. They work for a contract. And the average time that they would work is 5 to 7 years, could be less, could be more, depending upon the contract. 7 out of every 10 colonists were indentured servants. So most of the colonists were indentured servants. And they were very heavily used in the middle colonies where there was a growing need for labor. Now, slaves, on the other hand, were exclusively African. There were no Caucasian slaves. And of course, we know they were brought here against their will, captured and taken from their families and their homes, and brought to the Americas to be slaves. The slaves could become free only if their owner freed them or by escaping. And we'll talk much more about this later in the year. At the time, slavery was legal in all 13 colonies. It was used much more in the southern colonies, but it was legal to own a slave in all 13 colonies. Now at this point, we're going to switch gears a little bit and jump from America over to Europe. This is a map of Europe, and I'd like you to tell me if you can identify this country and this country. Do you know what they are? If you said that this was France and this was Great Britain, you'd be correct. And what's important is, while Great Britain was colonizing America, during much of that time, France and Great Britain did not get along. They were at war with each other. It's important to know that they were at war while America was being colonized. They fought over land, they fought over leadership, religion, many different things. Now back in America, you can see this map shows that the 13 colonies, of course, was controlled by the English or the British. And also much of Canada was controlled by the British. But all of this land was controlled by the French. That's important because while France and Great Britain fight in Europe, the French and the British are also going to fight with each other here in America. Now, much of the territory that was fought over looked like this. Okay? Just wide open expanse of land. The territory we're talking about is right in here. If this is the Appalachian Mountains, This is the Mississippi River. This is the territory that they were fighting over. And this territory is called the Ohio Valley. And there are many natural resources in the Ohio Valley. You can see trees. There were many resources in the ground, and a great resource that was used by many people in this area were the animals. And you know that you can hunt and use animals for many different things, not just food, but also for their fur. And this led to many people going to this region for fur, for the fur trade. It's going to lead to the French and Indian War, or as the Europeans called it, the 7 Years' War. It's the same thing. French and Indian War in the Americas, 7 years is what it was called in Europe. Why was it called the French and Indian War? Well, not because the French and Indians fought, but because the British and the American colonists were fighting against the French and the Indians. So the French and the Indians are on one side of the war, and the British and the American colonists are on the other side. Now we're going to take a look at France and Great Britain, how they relate to the Americas and the Ohio Valley. And again, draw a graphic organizer in your notes and make sure and jot this down. France had small settlements in the New World. So when the French colonized America, also known as the New World, they didn't cut out giant colonies. They just had small settlements here and there. And because of this, as you'll see, the British, who has large colonies in the New World, the 13 large colonies, who do you think, because of this, was affected most by the settlements of the French and the British? And of course, it was the Indians, the people that lived here already. So when the French settled, because they just had small settlements, they were trusted by the Indians. They weren't seen as a threat to the Indians' lands. But by the 1670s, the Indians are going to begin to feel threatened by the British. The British have taken gigantic areas of land, and the Indians start to feel that the British are just going to take everything from them. The French wanted to settle the Ohio Valley for the fur trade. They can capture and kill animals and use their fur to make money. And the British also wanted to settle the Ohio Valley for the fur trade, and this is going to lead to violent conflict, the French and Indian War. Now, we're not going to take a look very closely at the events of the French and Indian War, but what's important is what happened afterwards. Wars are usually ended by something called a treaty. A treaty is a piece of paper that both sides sign to agree on a peace. And usually the losers of a war have to give things up to the winners. The Treaty of Paris of 1763 ended the French and Indian War. And it's important that you have this date because there's going to be another Treaty of Paris 20 years later that's going to be very different from this one. So what did the Treaty of Paris say? It said that the British are going to gain control over the area from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River, plus Canada. And we'll take a look at a map in a minute here that will show you this a little more clearly. The Spanish helped the French. The Spanish had Florida during this time, and because the French lost and the Spanish helped them, Florida becomes the property of the British. Also during the French and Indian War, George Washington is going to become well known as a strong leader. And of course, we know what he's going to go on to do. So the balance of power changes in North America. The balance of power. Before it was the British and the French both had gigantic areas of land, but after the war it's the British. The British have the most control in North America. Now wars cost a lot of money. You've got to pay for weapons, you've got to pay for supplies, you've got to pay your soldiers. How can Great Britain pay for it? And that's going to lead into our next topic. But before we get to that, let's take a look at a couple of maps. This is the map from before where you can see before the French and Indian War, the English controlled this territory, the French controlled this territory. But then afterwards, you can see how much all of this, all of this, all of this is all under control of the British. That's very important that so much territory in America and Canada came under British control. So hopefully this map clarifies it a little bit. Now what all this is going to lead to when the British have to pay for the war, it's going to lead to the American Revolution, and that will be our next topic. So again, feel free to rewind this video at any time, pause wherever you need to, go back, review it, take good notes, and most importantly, write down any questions that you have or any clarification that you may need.